Good morning and welcome to the Intimacy of Race Facebook group. And I'm also streaming live on YouTube as well. So I just want to say good morning and thank you for joining me live or watching on the replay. And I want to tell you a little bit about the Intimacy of Race Facebook group. I created this group shortly after the racial uprisings that occurred in 2020 as a result of the videotaped murder of George Floyd. And what I realized was that there was no safe space for people to have discussions without arguments breaking out, reactions, defensiveness, accusations. And what it was creating was not only the beginning of real cancel culture, but also it was creating, there was no safety created so that people could learn, share, and learn. So I want to talk to you guys today about the importance of creating safe spaces, psychological safety, because there's so much trauma, shame, blame, and guilt in all of us. And how can we feel safe to be curious enough to learn, to feel safe enough to make mistakes on our learning journey so that we can have solutions, we can move forward, we can come closer together. So if you're joining live or on the replay, please say hello and where you're tuning in from and what you are learning from maybe some of the things that I'm sharing today. So I want to set for you kind of not only the importance of creating psychological safety, but a framework that you can use in your life and in your businesses and in your communities so that you are known as, you can role model. Let me put it to you that way. You can role model what psychological safety feels like. And what I mean by that is that you can be the person that people feel safe sharing, talking, being curious with, without fear of being shamed, blamed, guilted, and judged, which scares, frankly, most of us into silence. In most workplace environments, people who are from oppressed and minoritized communities often feel alone and unsafe, even though they may not share that, even though they, on the outside, look and portray themselves as being okay. But a lot of times, some of the unconscious biases and microaggressions that are, I want to say, unintentionally experienced in a workplace setting causes us, people of minoritized communities and oppressed communities, to not feel safe to be real. And so we put on a facade, we put on a mask, we put on something that we feel is culturally acceptable in our company culture so that we don't feel singled out, we don't get singled out, we don't share when we feel unsafe, when we feel, what's the word I'm looking for? When we feel offended, that's the word I'm looking for. When we feel offended because we don't feel safe, because we know that we are going to be challenged with the why. And that causes us not to feel safe to share what we are feeling. I know for myself, one of the aha moments that I had coming out of all of the discussions when it comes to Black Lives Matter, microaggressions, white fragility, even, what I realized was how much I protected white fragility like my entire life. And looking deeper into it, it always came, I think it was born out of, you know, the mob lynchings. So, okay, so I wasn't alive. Well, I was alive in the 60s, but I was a very young child when these lynchings were still happening in the South. But when we're talking about the turn of the century in the early 20th century, when they were really, really prominent, you know, Black people historically were terrified, terrified. They're called terror lynchings, terrified of offending a white person because we knew in our bones that if a white woman or even a white man felt offended by anything that we said or did and saw that as an affront to them and their superiority, terror lynches were happening. So you'll notice that I'm sharing in the Facebook group, The Intimacy of Race. And for anybody who's watching this on YouTube and you're not a part of that group, please join it. It's The Intimacy of Race on Facebook. I've been sharing articles from that the EGI have been putting in my inbox, talking about this day in history, the racial injustices that happened this day in history, however long ago that was, so that we can become more aware and have the resources to have a deeper understanding of where our lack of psychological safety in our workplace environments especially were born of and where they came from. And I always remember my father, it's just something that I remember that either was spoken once or twice or unspoken is you don't want to upset the white people. Don't say anything. Hold it in. Keep it to yourself, because we never felt safe to be ourselves, because that could cause, an offense to a person who was from a highly privileged group. So here's what I want to share with you. How important it is to create psychological safety, and how to create, let me put it to you this way, a framework to create psychological safety in your lives, in your workplace, in your communities as people of privilege. And so, you always hear the phrase, invite my minoritized communities and have diversity, give them a seat at the table. And so I want to encourage that on a little bit of a deeper level, to say we need a voice at the table. And when we have a voice at the table, it's important to listen. Listen for understanding, not listen for to response, not listen to have something to say back in return, but listen to get a clear understanding. And if you don't have a clear understanding, ask what I call clarifying questions. So first, you want to listen. That's number one. And the second, you want to acknowledge. You want to acknowledge the person for sharing, because just acknowledge that sometimes it's not easy to share vulnerably or what's deep down inside, because we fear retaliation in any way, which could be loss of job, which could be, not having a seat at the cool kids table anymore. There's so many deep traumatic psychological fears that are in minoritized communities and people of color that you may not fully understand. So I want to encourage you, when you are listening, to first acknowledge the person for sharing, even if it's in a form of thank you. Thank you for feeling safe enough to share that with me. Thank you for sharing that. I can imagine that wasn't easy, or something like that. But just something to just have that little bit of an exhale, because know that it's not easy. Yes, we're feeling more empowered and more emboldened because of the collective awareness around these issues. However, it's still scary to put yourself out there, and it's not easy for a lot of people. So listen, acknowledge, and then I want you to repeat what you heard, so that it's conveyed that you understand what they said. And maybe you don't fully get it, so to speak, but if you can repeat or restate without judgment, without agreeing or disagreeing, nobody's asking you to agree or share your agreement or disagreement, but just to say, if I'm hearing you correctly, this is what you're saying. If I'm hearing you correctly, this is what you're feeling. Did I get that right? And this is the opportunity for the person to say, no, that's not quite it. Let me restate it. Or, yes, you got it. That's exactly what it is. And so now you're in a mutual understanding and you're not moving forward, mishearing or miscommunicating or have a misunderstanding. And then finally, you want to ask how or what questions that lead to a solution. If somebody's feeling a type of way and they're sharing that with you, what you want to do after you've listened, acknowledged, and repeated what you heard is to ask either, something like, how can I support you? Or what needs to happen for you to feel better about this? Or what do you think we should do moving forward so that this doesn't happen again? Because when you come from a place of why do you feel that way? It puts people on the defensive. And this is really critical in all your communication. Why puts you in a position or the other person in a position to defend and react in a defensive manner? And instead, without responding responsibly. And so, it may be like, I'm not sure what needs to happen, but I know something needs to change and maybe we can work together to find a solution. What do you need to feel? What do you need to hear? What do you need to say? What do you need to hear back? What needs to happen in our company culture? What needs to happen in our relationship so that you feel seen, heard, and understood on both sides? Because accusations and defensiveness have never made a conversation stronger. It always will lead to some kind of conflict and can make matters worse. So when we talk about psychological safety, it's really important to role model not only what you would like in return, but in ways that make people feel that this is a safe space to share, even though it may be uncomfortable, it may be unpopular, it may be an outside of the box thinking. But let's share together so that we have a deeper understanding of each other, because so much of the conflict that's going on in the world today is a result of people not really being understood, feeling understood, and us not understanding. So I hope that helps. Please share with me what your aha was in that and what you think you can bring into your conversations, relationships, company culture that models this LARA framework. Listen, acknowledge, repeat for understanding what you heard, and ask solution-based questions. What or how, not why. Because why will bring up, I got to defend why I'm feeling like I'm feeling. And, that is creating a lot of exhaustion in the Black community, especially. We are exhausted trying to explain ourselves to you. And so know that your Black friends are exhausted trying to explain themselves to you. But when you ask, what needs to happen? How can I support? What do you need me to do? How can I be of service? How can I listen better? What do you need to hear me say? Like all of those things, so that we're in kind of a give and take for psychological safety on both sides. All right, guys, have an amazing Friday and weekend, and I will not probably be here next week, but I'll let you know. Bye.